Hello, everybody. This is a week for the Jayskers. I'm Sam McKewon on the Haskell Press podcast, along with Wilson Moore, who covers Nebraska, and our new beat writer for Creighton, Jon Walker. Jon, how are you today?
I'm good. How are you?
I'm all right. We're hanging in there. This will probably be the last time that Creighton and Nebraska basketball fans hear me on this podcast, but I'm here to just introduce Jon, and then Jon and Wilson will take the podcast from here. But here we are. It's rivalry week. Creighton has a game before that, ironically, in the place where Jon just was, Stillwater, Oklahoma. And then on Sunday at 3 p.m., after everybody's had an early Sunday lunch, they will have the big game at PBA. Nebraska, 7-0. Creighton, presumably 6-1 by then, but we'll see. Nebraska and Creighton, the renewal of a rivalry. Nebraska has a one-game winning streak in this series. We'll get to that rivalry in a second, but I want to start first with Jon. Welcome to the World-Herald. It's happy to have you here.
Thank you. Happy to be here, for sure.
Welcome to Creighton basketball. I want you to kind of tell our listeners, and obviously some of them are also our readers, just a little bit about your background and how you came to be here and what you think of the sport of college basketball.
Yeah, I'm a rabid college basketball fan first and foremost. I think when in one of my earliest conversations with Sam, I'd kind of said I love nothing more in college athletics than an absolutely vile college basketball environment, because there's just something that eats at you about it. There's something you can't. It's addictive. But yeah, I was, as Sam kind of alluded to, I was at Oklahoma State, covering Oklahoma State for the Stillwater News Press, and have made my way here. There I covered high schools, everything on OSU's campus, obviously football, men's basketball, women's basketball, the big ones. But yeah, I'm a kid from Kansas City, the Kansas City area anyways, and have just kind of made my way slightly up north to what some have told me is the middle of everywhere.
Yeah, that's a good way of putting it.
Yeah.
Yes, that's actually the title of a book, The Middle of Everywhere, and we can talk about that some other time. But yes, it is, and it's the title of a great book, actually, and it's kind of about Lincoln and Omaha. But yeah, so here you are at Creighton. I don't think you probably paid a ton of attention to Creighton prior to taking this job, but you've seen them probably in the last month or so. Again, they're still in the top 25. They're number 15. They were sort of mowing everybody down until an uncharacteristic performance in Kansas City against Colorado State. What have you seen so far from the Jays, and what do you think of them?
Yeah, it's a different brand of basketball than what I've watched over the past couple of years. Really, really free-flowing. They want to get out and run. They want to get out and transition. And that all starts on the defensive end, it seems like, with the reigning Big East Defensive Player of the Year, Ryan Kalkbrenner. So that's kind of my, my early takeaways of them. And then, obviously, anybody who's watched this team this year knows that their objective is to shoot the lights out of the gym. When they don't do that, the Colorado State game happens. So that's kind of the early impression I've had of them. But man, when they are on, they are hard to beat. That is for sure.
For sure. They're 6 of, I don't remember what their number was. Was it 6 of 29
yeah,
from 3?
6 of 29.
Against CSU.
They're not going to do that many games, I don't think.
No. They did it last year against Nebraska. Very close to it. And Nebraska, in some ways, has some similarities to CSU in terms of the physicality that they played with last year. I think that's kind of true this year, too. I don't know that they're quite as locked down on the perimeter as Colorado State is. But as you think about, obviously, the story of this team is that, they went to a Sweet 16 a couple of years ago during the COVID year. And then they went to the Elite Eight last year, fell basically one possession short. They lose by 1. Ryan Nembhard kind of barely grabbed a guy's jersey. They called a foul. They lose the game. Nembhard transfers out. So does Arthur Kaluma. I don't know that there's been a second where I think they've missed Kaluma much. Now, there's things that Kaluma did well, but I don't know that he's been terribly missed. I do think they've missed Nembhard a little. And Nembhard could press. He could push pace. He could, like a running game, he could tire a defense out. Ashworth is the guy that basically replaced Nembhard. Not quite the same player, but it seems like, you had mentioned that they want to shoot the lights out of the gym. As Trey Alexander and Baylor Shireman go, so kind of go this team, right?
Yeah. Oh, for sure. I mean, they brought Baylor in from North Dakota State? South Dakota State. I knew it was one of the Dakotas for kind of that reason to be the playmaker he was there. We all know, regardless of sport, that sometimes you miss in the transfer portal. I don't think he's one of those instances, at least not so far. He's translated well to the level, obviously. And yes, getting Stephen Ashworth, a guy who shot 40-some% in Utah State. I mean, obviously he's been a welcome addition to the roster too. But yeah, Trey Alexander has just kind of emerged as an absolute superstar. Big East Player of the Week a couple of weeks ago or a week ago.
He did,
and averaged nearly was an assist and a rebound shy of averaging a triple-double in that week. Mm-hmm. So, I mean, that was just, like, ridiculous. So, yeah, it's not a stretch to say whatsoever that is, as far as Trey Alexander go, as far as Baylor Shireman go, is really as far as Creighton goes, it seems.
And it's not a knock on Kalkbrenner at all.
No.
And I'm the one making that statement. And to be clear, I think Kalkbrenner is, you could argue that he is the MVP of the team. But Kalkbrenner is going to bring much of the same energy every single night. And he is going to be a guy that's in drop coverage, that blocks shots and does all those things, and is a guy that rolls to the rim and does all those things really well. Kalkbrenner is a constant. But Kalkbrenner doesn't score 37 points and grab 22 rebounds a game. So there's only so much a 7'2" center can do to affect a game, and we know this because Kalkbrenner is in his fourth year at Creighton. He's not in the NBA. So, and there's nothing wrong with that. He's a very, very good player, but they need Trey and Baylor to show up every single night. And when those two guys don't play, even if Kalk plays well, which he did against Colorado State, in my opinion, they don't win. So, Baylor and Trey are two key portions of it. So far, Ashworth is averaging 8 points and 3.5 assists. Now, Ashworth was more of a 15-point-a-game guy when he was at Utah State. I'm sure they want a little bit more from him. That said, the big three for Creighton are doing really well. You kind of look at some of the other guys. Isaac Trout's off to an interesting start. The way that they try to replace Kaluma is a little bit of Isaac Trout when Mason Miller's healthy, and he hasn't been healthy.
Okay.
He missed, Mason missed the Colorado State game. But if you take Isaac and Mason and you smush them together, Isaac Trout being the guy from Grand Island who moved back here from Virginia, and Mason Miller, you get about 15 points a game and 7 rebounds. And I'll tell you what, that's pretty much what Kaluma was giving you. Now, there's some other things Kaluma could give, the flash dunk, some other stuff, but I feel like they can combine to kind of replace a Kaluma, and then we'll just see. I think so far, I would say Ashworth has not been up to what Nembhard was, but things kind of remain to be seen. Quickly on Oklahoma State, you know this team better than pretty much everybody since you were covering them.
Yeah.
What threat would they pose to Creighton, and what are their weaknesses?
Yeah, so it's a little bit different of a team than Mike Boynton's had in his 7th year. It's a little bit different of a team. Usually he would self-admittedly say that they are way further ahead defensively until about January when Big 12 play starts. It's a complete opposite this year. So it's a little bit different of an approach for them. They are still trying to find their way because they had 3 returning scholarship players from a year ago, a 5-deep freshman class, and the rest are transfers. And then a few of those transfers and one of the freshmen have been injured. So they are literally still trying to find their feet. Brutal start to the season. Lost on opening night to Abilene Christian at home. Just kind of a no bueno case scenario. But they're gonna try and run the floor. I wouldn't be surprised if we have like 83 shot, 73 shot between these two teams. It's just like it's gonna happen. I think.
So they shoot a lot of threes too.
Yeah, I think there'll be a lot of possessions. Probably like some team is probably gonna reach 90 in this game because I just think there will be that many scoring opportunities. So that's what they want to do. They don't have a bruiser like Colorado State had down low. And it's because a lot of their post play are the freshmen. So they're still trying to figure some things out, get used to them, this level essentially. But yeah, it'll be interesting to see what Oklahoma State presents, because I'm not sure up to this point if they even know, because they're still just trying to mix and match lineups and figure out what their identity is going to be.
Did they go to the NIT last year?
They went to the NIT, lost at home in the quarterfinals to North Texas, I believe the eventual champion in Vegas. Yeah,
Is he on the hot seat? He probably ought to be, right?
I'd say so. And he's pretty self-aware about that. I think he had mentioned after they beat Sam Houston, or maybe New Orleans, he doesn't want the players to coach or to play for his job, essentially, is what he said. He just wants them to play to win.
Yeah.
So he's a very self-aware guy.
Year 7, one NCAA tournament at Oklahoma State's not
No,
really what they're looking for.
No,
right?
and even when they went to the tournament, they had Cade Cunningham, the number 1 draft pick, and lost in the second round.
Yep.
So that in itself was probably disappointing. I wasn't around there for that, but I'm sure that in itself was disappointing. And then overall, you take a step back and realize that they've made it once in 7 years, and it's brutal. Now, they've had the NCAA stuff on top of that and whatnot, but still.
Whatever anyone wants to say about the future of the Big 12 football conference, and I don't think it'll be very good, the Big 12 basketball conference will be elite going forward.
Yeah,
so,
absolutely.
Oklahoma State knows what it's like to play really good teams. There's a ton of really good teams in the Big 12 every single year, so they're not going to be any strangers to what Creighton brings to the table at all. So they have athletes, and they'll make for an interesting game. Then we have Sunday, Creighton at Nebraska, and I'll be honest with you, the story I think is more Nebraska, Wilson. At this point, they're 7-0. Not terribly surprising that they're 7-0, but they have not sweat a ton in those 7. There hasn't been an overtime game or a 3-point win or any of that.
I don't
They've
think
scored
even
really,
a game by single digits.
They've scored too.
Yeah.
I mean, this is Nebraska usually can't get out of the 60s once or twice in non-con play, but what have you seen so far from this team?
I've seen a team that has a lot of tools. I still don't think we've seen them quite put it together yet. But it's a team that, as you mentioned, is capable of scoring and is capable of playing really good defense. They haven't done that in the past 2 or 3 games. Rink Mast had, I thought, an interesting quote after the most recent game where he said, and paraphrasing here, just that Nebraska had kind of took for granted the way it played the first couple of games. That it was, early in the season, first couple of games, it was crashing the boards. They were hitting dudes,
right.
And he said we kind of stopped doing that. So I'm interested in seeing, looking at Sunday, how they do that, because I know you've mentioned I wasn't here last year. Part of the how they beat Creighton a year ago was Derek Walker just taking it to Kalkbrenner.
Oh, no question.
So I mean, it's a guy that you need to be physical with, and I think we're going to see Nebraska with kind of a renewed effort to do that after the past couple of games, and just a lot of pieces. I know before we recorded this, you said Tom Chattel's quote, "They're a potluck team."
That's a great line.
That is a great line.
Everybody kind of brings something different.
Yeah, and I think we've seen that it can be offensively, it can be a different guy's night on any given night. It was Rink Mast the other day. We haven't seen Keisei Tominaga go crazy yet this year, which I think we will see at some point. A lot of different guys who can affect the game.
So, you haven't been around the rivalry a ton. I think I can inform it a little bit. But do you get a sense at all of how much feeling there is behind wanting to win this game? Or is it just an opportunity to put a really good RPI/net win on the board?
I think from just, a purely analytical, objective standpoint, then this Nebraska team is 7-0. They haven't really played anyone all that hard. I think the best team they've played by KenPom was Duquesne. Oregon State's the one Power 6 team they've seen, and Oregon State's not especially good. But I think this game would really kind of solidify that this Nebraska team is good and can beat good teams. Like I said, we've seen the pieces, we've seen what they can do. This is their first opportunity to really show, hey, we can do this, and we can do it against good teams too. It's not just, the Riders and the Stony Brooks of the world. As far as the rivalry, I haven't gotten a great sense of that yet. There will be an availability sometime this week that I imagine we'll get, or at least I'll understand things a little more. I do understand just, the basics of that this is an in-state rival. This is a big deal. Nebraska is not, the historically favored team in this rival, and I know how that can kind of eat away at a fan base. How that bugs a fan base. So a little bit.
Yeah, for sure. There's only one considerable contributor from last year's game at Nebraska in this year's game. Yeah. That's Jon Walker.
Yeah.
Everybody else is gone.
Yeah.
Walker, Griesel, Casey didn't play a ton in that game and didn't play well. Bandamel's gone. Other guys are gone. So I don't know how much emotion Jon Walker will have in that game. I don't know. He just showed up last year too.
I think Jon Walker plays with emotion regardless of the opponent.
That's right. I think that's accurate. Sam Hoiberg may care. I don't know. I mean, Sam didn't play in last year's game. Sam had not yet emerged. Yeah. At that point in the season, and so he probably has something. Fred Hoiberg and Doug McDermott are friends. I mean, they are. They're contemporaries. They respect each other. They both have really good golf games. They golf.
Who do you think's better?
I'm pretty sure Hoiberg's better.
You think that'll come into play Sunday?
That's because Hoiberg's really good.
Okay.
So I think Hoiberg's close to scratch, and Doug maybe, or Greg maybe too. Greg's a little older, so I don't know. But they're both they're both they both love that. So Greg McDermott was the coach at Iowa State. Yeah. He left. They didn't hire Fred then. It was some other guy. And then Fred came in. He was also the coach at Iowa State. One of your predecessors wrote a neat story about how there was a basketball secretary who retired, and she was at Iowa State, and she was close to both Greg and Fred, and they both came back for her retirement party. And so these are two people that really like and respect each other. I think there's more of a warmth there. Although I think Miles and McDermott were warm too, I think this is more of these two guys really see eye to eye with one another. And I think Fred even coached Duck for a half minute with the Bulls.
That's right, yeah. That would have.
And so aligned. There's a lot of similarities between the way that they try to run offense. I think if you were to ask me what the gap between the two coaches has been up to this point, I think McDermott is an elite evaluator of talent and players and is able to see something on a screen or at a game that says, here, that, I want that, and that turns out to be a real damn good player. Not that Hoiberg doesn't have that ability, but when Hoiberg got here, he was relying on other people to do that for him. And I think McDermott's able to do it. Like if you said he'd be the best NBA scout out there tomorrow. And so I think he's built a better program, but I think Hoiberg's getting there. I think the culture at Nebraska has improved. And so it feels like I'm just telling you that on Sunday the crowd will feel different.
I believe that.
It'll be angrier. There'll be some blue in the crowd. Probably, up in the upper reaches, but a few down below too, and it'll be angrier, it'll be meaner, and Nebraska will actually have to manage that a little bit because I think you'll feel the energy in the building, and Nebraska's going to have to work through it. Yeah. I think Creighton will embrace it. I think they'll love it. John, you were talking about a vile environment. Creighton plays in a few of those every year.
Yeah.
They play at that.
Yeah, you earn the target on your back.
Connecticut, but when you play Connecticut, that's what it is.
For sure.
It's very hard to play there. I think it's hard to play at Marquette. I don't know that it's hard to play in Villanova's NBA gym, whatever they call it, where the Sixers play. But occasionally they play Villanova in the little gym. And then the hardest one, I think, is Providence. I think if you were to ask Creighton,
really?
Providence is really tough and it's really full. And so Creighton's used to this. They're used to that kind of angry energy in a crowd. I think they'll manage it maybe better than Nebraska. Nebraska's going to have to deal with that. It won't be a hostile crowd in Nebraska, but it'll have an energy to it. Nebraska can't come out overamped and juice their shots. They just, Casey's got to come out. It would help if Casey comes out and hits 2 or 3.
Yeah.
Because that determines how the rest of the game's going to go for him a lot of times.
Yeah.
He's like he's like an 8-point a guy game, or you kind of know when he's going to put up a 25 piece.
Yeah. And he's a guy who loves that kind of environment, too. Like, he's a guy who, when he gets rolling and he can feel it, he totally feeds off of that.
Mm-hmm.
That'll be interesting, yeah. Because when's the last time Nebraska, obviously I'm saying this as the new guy in the area, when's the last time Nebraska had a packed-out gym for a game like this? Probably last year's Creighton game? Or did they have a couple of Big Ten games last year?
The Creighton game last year's here. Iowa.
Iowa?
Yeah.
That makes sense.
Did they play? They played Iowa. Yes.
Last year? Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay.
They
Yeah,
swept Iowa last year.
Yeah,
Okay.
they played Iowa twice. They only played them once this year.
Well, to be honest with you, John, so like at the end of the year, because Jimmy left to go to Cleveland, I was the beat writer for a brief amount of time, and it was a zoo for Maryland and Michigan State. They beat Maryland, and Michigan State was on here on senior night, and Nebraska kind of needed to beat Michigan State to clinch a berth in the NIT or keep this sort of long shot NCAA thing going. And the first half of that game, Nebraska, I think, went into the halftime up by 8 or 9, and it was pretty crazy. So, yeah, Nebraska fans don't have a hard time getting worked up in any sport but football. Like, in football, it's harder because there's this memory of what it used to be like. Mm-hmm. But in every other sport, they get on board pretty fast. But
Yeah.
I think it'll be a meaner crowd on Sunday.
Yeah.
Like, Nebraska's fans don't disrespect Michigan State. They don't like Creighton.
Yeah.
And so I think that... But I think Creighton will actually embrace that. They'll be like, we're fine in this environment. Trey Alexander will love that. I think Baylor will love it. This is going to be Baylor's only time, playing as a. So he's a kid from Aurora, Nebraska. When he decided to transfer back from SDSU, he could have gone to Nebraska.
Yeah.
And he didn't want to go to Nebraska. He wanted to go to Creighton. And I think a lot of the reason he wanted to go to Creighton is because of the the NCAA tournament thing. I think the NIL was better at Creighton than it was at Nebraska. And what a lot of people would hope would have happened is that Baylor from Aurora, which is like, 30 miles from Lincoln, would have paired up with Sam Griesel, who was the guy from North Dakota State. So Nebraska got a guy from North Dakota State, and they wanted to pair him with Baylor. And they were going to be the backcourt on that team. And didn't pan out. And so Baylor's going to have to deal with, I think, some stuff going into that space. But I think he'll like that. I think Creighton will respond very positively. Do you think Nebraska comes into? Do you think they're favored going into that game? Just like, do you think they're going to win the game?
I don't.
Okay.
I just feel like Creighton has too many weapons. Like, I mean, we saw what Colorado State did to Creighton, and that can serve as something of a blueprint. But at the same time, like, Trey Alexander's not going to shoot 1 for 16 from the field. I think Nebraska is solid. I think they're better than I think a lot of people thought they're going to be coming into this year. I think they're going to win some Big Ten games, but I just think Creighton has so much firepower, and I think Colorado State was more the exception we'll find throughout the season than the rule as far as what we'll see night to night. I don't think Nebraska gets blown out. I think Nebraska hangs with them. I think it's single digits, but I think Creighton wins.
Who covers Trey Alexander?
It's interesting you bring that up because I was thinking about this like all on the way over here. Nebraska has had Bryce Williams on the other team's best perimeter scorer for the most part, at least to begin the game. But we saw last week when Max Jones was going off for Duquesne, they switched Jawan Gary onto him in the second half, and I think that's what they should do on Trey Alexander. I think Jawan is Nebraska's best perimeter defender, and I think if there was ever a game and Fred has said he's willing to, kind of change around the lineups, go with what they need on a specific night. I think if there was ever a night to have Jawan Gary start and bring Josiah Alec off the bench, it would be against Creighton. So if you're Nebraska, you can put Gary on Trey Alexander.
A couple of years ago, Nemhard put a clown suit on Nebraska down in Lincoln.
Yeah.
He dominated that game, and they couldn't cover him. He was too quick, and that wasn't as good of a Nebraska team. I mean, he made Verge look silly. last year, I cannot remember the impact that Nembhard had. It was an odd day. I remember distinctly that my car had a flat tire or something. It was like a Sunday, and I had to go to friggin' Walmart. And so I remembered watching the game while my tire was getting done, and I was like, this is not an ideal location to be watching this game. But that's what I remember doing on that particular day. So I can't remember what Nembhard's impact was that day, but I'll be curious to see who covers Trey. I think you can put Bryce Williams on Baylor Sharman, but let's be honest. Baylor's going to get a lot of shots before anything sets up.
Yeah.
That's what he does. And he can shoot from – he's not quite got Casey range, but he's got 27 feet. I just don't know if Bryce is going to get all the way out there or if he's even going to have time.
Yeah.
I think it comes down to if Creighton defends Nebraska really well and gets out in transition, Nebraska's going to have to run.
Yeah.
And I just don't know if they got the guys that can run the way Creighton runs. I just don't. Now, if Creighton doesn't defend very well and Nebraska gets a set up in the half court and they're efficient on offense,
Yeah.
and Creighton's got to play in the half court, and that's the thing. So Colorado State slowed it way down. And, John, you'll notice this. I don't know if Villanova will do this year, but Villanova wasn't very good last year. They were kind of building. And so their coach, Kyle Neptune, slowed everything down. I mean, it was like watching Minnesota football. I mean, every possession was, 31 seconds long. And it bothered Creighton. And I think what Colorado State did is they slowed it down. And so they made Creighton defend, and then even if they missed a shot, they weren't going for rebounds and they were setting up. That's the key is, Creighton's very comfortable playing Iowa, who wants to jack up threes and wants to run because Creighton's like, we'll outrun you. And they did. It's that team that slows it down. Will Nebraska have the patience and the discipline to say, many games we'd like to run, today we won't. Today we're going to frustrate this team by making them defend for 30 seconds.
And that's going to take a really, I think, mature performance from Jamarcus Lawrence, especially. Yep. They've asked a lot of him this season, moving from the 2 to the 1, being the starting point guard. And he's played pretty well for the most part. He hasn't shot the ball particularly well, but he has done what he's needed to do, just having a feel for the offense, knowing when to push the pace. But again, he's a sophomore. He's young, and he's going to need to be a guy who doesn't get caught up in the crowd and the environment and the atmosphere and try to do too much, try to run, try to make the flashy play. He's got to be the adult with the ball in his hands. So I'm interested in seeing that.
I agree with you. It says C.J. Welcher game 2.
Yeah.
If C.J. scores 11, you feel good about it. He's probably going to take every game. C.J. is going to take about 4 or 5 threes, and if he makes 3 of them, they usually win. I'm going to go through Stat Reference and just look at it at some point this week and just say how many times when C.J. Welcher made 3 threes did they win?
Yeah.
And I'm thinking it's pretty high.
I bet you're right about that.
Because usually that means he's A, open, and B, he's never their number one scorer. He's always a supplementary scorer, and it usually means they win.
Yeah.
So it'll be interesting to watch. John, what are you looking most forward to in covering this particular team and this league?
Yeah, it's kind of similar to the Big 12 in a way of just really rich basketball history, really rich basketball tradition from a bunch of really rich programs. You have your Villanovas of the world, your Georgetowns, your Creightons, St. John's now. It is, if there's any league that I would have wanted to cover other than the Big 12 basketball, why would you not pick the Big East?
Right.
But with this team in particular, I went to Northwest Missouri State, small Division II school that I'm sure some people around here probably know.
Yeah, absolutely.
Only about an hour and a half, I think, down the road. Really similar offensive styles. Maybe not exactly, but just in terms of wanting to run the floor, wanting to get out in transition, being free-flowing in a half-court set if it comes to that, if the game is slowed down. That's what I've seen from CU so far.
And they produced, Northwest Missouri State produced a player who fit perfectly in his 1 year.
Ryan Hawkins.
Yeah.
the GOAT.
Well, he's certainly the GOAT there.
Yeah, no,
and,
for
and
sure.
he brought Creighton within one possession, one bad pass of beating Kansas. I mean,
Yeah.
for people who remember that
Yeah.
game, Creighton probably, maybe this is unfair. Creighton probably wins that game if there's one possession in the final minute that goes differently.
Yeah.
Happens to be the best game that Arthur Klum ever played in his life, and they never got that performance again. But, there's one possession, about 57 seconds left. Everybody that watched that game remembers the possession really well. And so Ryan Hawkins was a big reason why they almost won that game.
Yeah.
And if they had, that would have been the biggest win in program history. Kansas goes on to win the national title. I think Creighton could have gone a long way in that tournament with that group of players. Even though two guys were hurt, it didn't matter. I think they'd found it, but we'll see. We'll see what happens here.
Yeah.
And this would be the biggest win in Hoiberg's tenure if they beat Creighton. Biggest one.
Yeah, absolutely.
I don't know what it is currently. Maybe it's Creighton last year.
Yeah.
Maybe it's that Maryland win.
It was almost that Purdue game.
Yeah. Talk about a possession.
Yeah.
One call at midcourt. Yeah. But this would be the biggest one.
Yeah.
Because that one was kind of off guard, no one expected it. This is the one where everybody's like, all right, Nebraska, let's see what you have.
Yeah.
And maybe they got it. We'll see. All right, we'll have full coverage of the game. Wilson's going to be there. John's going to be there. Tom Chattel's going to be there. We'll have full court coverage of Creighton, Nebraska on Sunday. It's going to be a hell of a game. And thanks for listening. Welcome to John. Hello again to Wilson. And starting next week, you'll hear these two guys talking about the schedule ahead. Nebraska goes to the Big Ten next week.
Yep.
So they go to Minnesota. Creighton, I can't remember who they play. I apologize.
They start Big Ten play early, huh?
They do. They have 1 week, and then they go
games,
back.
yeah.
Okay.
They play 20 Big Ten games. Now, the Big East plays 20 games too, but this is the way they do it. So, yeah, the Big Ten has one little stretch, and for once, Nebraska got a reasonable stretch. They don't have to play Purdue at home and Indiana on the road, which is what they had to do last year. They get at Minnesota, and then they have to play the Big Ten preseason favorite, Michigan State. But better to play them now than play them during Izzo March, which is what they had to do last year. So we'll see what happens. All right, thanks for listening, Husker and Jay fans. Enjoy Rivalry Week.